John O'Keefe or Karen Reed, did either of them at any point in time come inside your house while you were there that evening?
No, never.
No, neither of them ever came into the home.
Come into your house?
No, they never came into my home.
John O'Keefe and Karen Reed never entered my house. Would have been welcomed, and the defendant would have been welcomed with open arms.
Welcome to our second hour of live coverage. Listening to a theme there? Well, those are members of the Albert family who own the home where Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found dead in a snowbank. They took the witness stand as the Commonwealth seeks to prove that O'Keefe's then-girlfriend, Karen Reed, the defendant on trial, hit him with her SUV and left him to die after an argument in January of 2022. Reed's defense says, however, that O'Keefe got into a fight with several men inside the home of Brian Albert, and that's how O'Keefe ended up dead. Hence the testimony you just heard in that little short clip. So to better understand the Commonwealth's theory, we're going to take back a look at the key testimony from members of the Albert family to piece together the timeline of what they say happened on that fatal night. Remembering, to any of you who are out there, because we always love to do this at the Law and Crime Network, timelines are key in so many instances in complex cases. Let's get to it.
But not well.
As far as the defendant, Ms. Reed, what, if any, conversation or interaction did you have?
I don't remember having any interaction with her whatsoever. My sister-in-law, Jen, had burst into my room. It was early in the morning, between 6 and 6:30, I would say. She said something to the effect, John is dead.
All right, we just heard from homeowner Brian Albert, who threw the party on the night in question, testified that he didn't even know anything was wrong until he was woken up by his sister-in-law, who informed him that John O'Keefe was dead outside. This plays into the theory that O'Keefe never entered Albert's home. But let's listen to more of what the Alberts had to say, beginning with Karen Reed and John O'Keefe showing up to the Waterfall Bar and Grill. This was just prior to Brian Albert's house party.
And if you know, about what time was it that Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed?
Before 11 o'clock. She opened her jacket and had a glass and pulled the glass out and started drinking the drink.
So at least during the time that you were there were no sort of arguments or disagreements or anything like that?
Nope, nothing.
And specifically to Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant, Ms. Reed, while you were there, during the short time that you were there when they were there, did you observe anything as far as any arguments or disagreements or anything like that?
No, I did not.
Okay, now we heard there that Karen Reed entered the Waterfall Bar and Grill allegedly with a glass underneath her jacket, indicating she had been drinking earlier in the night and prior to arriving at the Waterfall Bar and Grill. Though we also hear of no unusual interactions between Reed and O'Keefe while at the bar. So where do they go from there? Let's take a listen.
It ended up being my son Brian's 23rd birthday. So at 12 o'clock, he would be 23. So there was some discussion about if anybody wanted to go by the house to kind of say happy birthday to him.
And when you look through the blinds, what is it that you saw out in front of your house at that time?
There was another car that I hadn't recognized before. It was a dark SUV. Yeah, so the first time I looked, I would say it was closer towards the mailbox, maybe a little bit in front of the mailbox. And then the second time, the last time I looked out the window, it had moved further down, closer to, I'll say, the flagpole. So closer that way, it went down that way.
You also testified earlier that you saw tire tracks in the snow, correct?
Yep.
So you'd agree that the visibility and lighting in front of the house was good enough that you were able to see tire tracks in the snow, correct?
Sure.
But you did not see a 220-pound man lying in the snow in your front yard.
No, I didn't.
John never came into my house that night. I wish they had. I really do.
All right, this is unbelievable. Let me bring in two of the guests here. Bob Hill, who's been with me before in studio as a trial attorney, and Danielle Jackson, criminal defense lawyer, in studio with me as well. So Danielle, let me start with you since you are fresh to this particular case. First of all, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I mean, here's my theory. Here's what I'm concerned about being a prosecutor. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but we, there's a lot of reasons and a lot of motives for people that were inside that house that was never investigated, never looked into, with a lot of bad investigation and shoddy investigation, which people could say may be shoddy on purpose by accident, or an accident by purpose, however they say that. And then, maybe it's a cover-up. Maybe it's somebody that did something wrong and they don't want to see their loved one in trouble or something of that nature. What are you feeling right now? Is the defense doing, even though they don't have to prove anything, are they doing a good enough job at nicking at the prosecution's case here with that theory?
I think they are. They are pointing out you were able to see certain things in the snow on this blizzard night, but then you also didn't see John O'Keefe, which we know from prior testimony was just laying there in the ground, in the snowbank over in front of the house. And so you have people going in and out of that house when John is allegedly outside. And I think that as long as the defense keeps pointing out, hey, all of these people were going in and out, they claim to see one thing but not another, I think that those holes are starting to create some doubt in the juror's mind about whether or not they're being completely truthful.
Yeah, so Bob, I mean, we were talking about this before. I mean, we really love this as trial lawyers, right? The defense lawyer did a really, really good job. Precise, crisp, direct questions that elicited yes or no answers about all the things that you didn't see. Okay, all the pieces of evidence that were there that you just must have overlooked as you were walking by it. Now, the defense is trying to say that it's likely that the victim was in the house, was beaten up, or something foul play happened there, and I guess later was brought into that particular area where he was found. Tell me, how do you think the defense is doing with regard to their questioning? And let's go to the most basic thing the defense attorney wants to do, which is get one juror to say not guilty, or one juror not to say that they can come to a conclusion. They'd like all 12, but do you think that they're getting at least a one?
Well, I think they're bringing up a lot of questions about this case. I mean, as you said before, timeline is critical here. What are we getting? We got 11 o'clock there at the bar, O'Keefe and the defendant. And then at 1:45, we have a witnessing of an SUV, and then at 2 a.m., there's nothing around that Levinson talked about earlier. So, even if you have the defendant's car in the scene, there's no body there. As you were saying, a 210-pound, 6'2", or 220-pound person at a time when you could even visibly see grass. The snow wasn't, down enough yet. So I think whether or not they believe perhaps the fight and the cover-up, they're going to have a lot of questions, at least probably one, and maybe even 12 are going to have a lot of questions about how did this person die and how did they get there? I don't know that so far the state has really done a good job of explaining that, other than to insinuate that it's their theory that's the only one that makes sense.
Okay, Danielle, as a criminal defense lawyer, that at the end of the case, the judge is going to read jury charges to the jurors. Now, in many instances, a judge can say that you can find somebody guilty on the evidence, or not guilty on the evidence, or a lack of evidence. And if they should have done an investigation that they did not do, you could take that into consideration as to whether or not that creates a reasonable doubt in your mind. In this particular case, do you not find, based on your training and experience, I mean, I certainly do, and maybe, we all made mistakes in our homicide investigations, but picking up blood and snow in a solo cup and not going into the house, is the failure to go into the house to see if there was a disturbance, to see if there's any evidence of a crime. You do that even if it's to show there's nothing there. And you know why? So a defense lawyer can't come in and say, you should have done it. What do you think?
I think that's their huge problem. For me, not going to that home, we have a body laying out in a lawn, is a huge factor that I think that these jurors are going to have a hard time getting over, despite the sloppiness of the collection of the evidence. I think them not going to that home, and we now know how tight this family is and all of the ties they have to various law enforcement officers and the unnecessary lying of the paramedic. I think for this jury, that's going to be a hard hurdle for them to just completely ignore.
And Bob, to her point, and I happen to agree with this. And I don't know, maybe it's jurisdictional, maybe it's at different places. And again, I don't mean this negatively. I was a law enforcement officer for many years of my career as a prosecutor. But sometimes there's group mentality, there's group thought, and you don't want to be outside that group because these people live and die by one another, and that is inculcated into their brain. And sometimes they may make a little mistake and fudge a fact, not realizing the consequences of that down the line, but feel like they've got to stick with it because if they don't, they could be prosecuted and they could be in trouble. What do you think? Is that in play here?
Well, I think that's exactly that. I mean, I think the jurors looking at this, they're saying, hey, look, these people all know each other. They're all police officers. They do have a brotherhood and sisterhood that they're very tight about. And then the other part of it is that something just doesn't add up here in terms of the explanation. So whether it's a full-blown conspiracy or what happened, but obviously this gentleman died. They died somehow. But I think they're going to pay careful attention to the injuries in the autopsy later on and that evidence. And they're going to look at how the mechanics of the theory with the car striking him matches up to those injuries to make sense.
And that's a really good point. And I have a funny suspicion from what I think I know that the prosecution's going to have a very big problem for a very, very big reason with regard to their theory of how the accident took place.